one of my project managers years ago said to me, he says, the more I know, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And at a point in time in your life, you have a certain awareness and knowledge of who you are and what you are. But then as you start exploring more, you start to find those gaps that you weren't aware were evident in the past.
If you're willing to open your eyes, you just might end up seeing exactly what you need to. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. Today, we have part 3 of our summer series called Who Not What From Research to Application. In our initial episode, we learned how the Who Not What principle was discovered and what it says, that 77% of our effectiveness as leaders comes from who we are, not what we do. In our second episode in the series, we heard from an HR executive who oversaw the application of the Who Not What research to executive leadership development in a publicly traded global organization. So in the series, we began with the research and then took a look at its application from an organizational perspective. That leaves us with one very important angle to investigate, that being the perspective of a leader who applied Who Not What research to his very own leadership development. In this final episode in the series, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to get up close and personal with a leader who dove into leveraging the Who Not What principle in his own leadership development. And that person is Domenic Saffioti. Dom has held a variety of leadership positions in engineering and asset management in the building materials manufacturing industry. As you'll hear, he wasn't satisfied with a passing understanding of Who Not What. He wanted to understand its intricacies and real-life applications. It was his engagement that ultimately made all the difference for him. Through his diligence and commitment, Dom made strides in who he is as a person, and that made him a markedly more effective leader both at work and at home. So let's join Domenic Saffioti as he takes us along on his very own Who Not What journey.
I've got an open mind to these kind of things, and it was a little bit of, okay, yeah, I'll buy into it, but I want to understand more. Why is that? What is it out of that 77%? What specifically in the who bit is so important? Because in the past, I've done some courses in personal development around emotional intelligence and, understanding some of that. You get a bit of a taste of the importance of who, but to sort of get a result that says that more than 3/4 of the effectiveness of a leader is related to who, it was, that's quite a significant number. And there's got to be a little bit more than just emotional intelligence to all of this. So let's find out a bit more.
So there's an openness, and then we begin to dig in. And initially, we dig into the concept of being others focused. If you can go back in time a little bit to think about the things that we engaged there, the things that you worked on there around being attentive and curious, empathic, humble, agapone, talk about kind of your first impressions of the idea of working to be a more others-focused leader.
I think one of the really important parts from all this for me was around the authenticity of it, of the others-focused bit. Is that being attentive, being curious, it's the genuineness in those particular things was the most important part of it. Because you can ask a question just for the sake of asking a question, but when you're genuinely interested in that other person, when it comes from within, that's when you get the greatest interaction with someone and the greatest engagement for that matter, and relationships and all of that kind of stuff build from that. So I think the authenticity in all of those things you mentioned about curiosity, about focus, attentiveness, and so forth, there's a lot of authenticity that has to come with that for it to be real and for it to be received in the way that it should be.
When we think about some of the outcomes of being others focused, the two that kind of leap to the top of the list are better relationships and better information. And there is actually a relationship between those two things, because initially, when I'm more others focused, I'm more trusted and people share more. But over time, they continue that cycle. So the healthier the relationship, the more that free flow of information, and ultimately that helps enable us as more effective leaders. But let's jump over to the other side of it for a second. As we engaged and explored the idea of being others focused, eventually we moved over and talked about the idea of being inwardly sound. And in that, we talked about being secure and settled. We talked about being self-aware, purposeful, principled, and also holistically healthy. So share with us a little bit about your experience with beginning to engage at a really personal level around the idea about what would it take for Dom to be an even more inwardly sound leader.
Look, I must be completely honest here. When I started the whole program with yourself, Tim, I wouldn't have said that I was an inwardly sound person at the time, to the extent that I am now, certainly. But understanding all of those components of being inwardly sound, actually analysing those, the secure and settled, and everything that goes beneath that, you start to dig into the who you are a little bit more and understand that. And when you do, you have that self-awareness to be able to appreciate it, understand how it affects others, and it allows you to be emotionally stable at a time when things are going on. So I think about going through what I'm going through now with both work and personal life, and it's nothing bad, it's just a lot of it. Thinking about how would I have dealt with that prior to the sort of 5 years that we spent together. And it would have been a very different outcome. It would have been an emotional wreck and a lot more stress. And yes, it's stressful, but being able to deal with that, being inwardly sound. You mentioned one thing many years ago, I'm okay, come what may, I'm okay. And that there, when things are going really tough, you sort of bring yourself back to that sounding board, that grounding that says it's okay. It's not about not caring about things, but it's about putting perspective on it. And it's about bringing it back to the things that matter.
So walk us through that connection a little bit, because you and I have had a chance to work together over a number of years, but some of the folks listening haven't had that experience, obviously. And so you and I very easily say being inwardly sound makes you a more effective leader. But if you were sharing with somebody who's listening to say, well, wait a second, how does that connection, like what's the relationship between being an effective leader and being inwardly sound? Having done the work that you have done, how would you explain that to somebody?
Your leader is the most influential person in your work life. And so that being the case, your behaviors as a leader has an impact on the people that follow you. And if you are inwardly sound, then the stability that creates across your team is visible. If you're someone who isn't inwardly sound and is emotionally unstable and is insecure, then your people will see that, and your people will respond in a way that is not necessarily conducive to a good work environment. So when things are going really tough with my team, myself, and something going wrong, someone needs to be there to keep that stable platform. Look, and I was fortunate enough to have someone like Ross Harper as a leader who embodied all of that. And I learned a lot from him. So I think about the shadow of the leader, and my leader is Ross, and I think of his shadow and the impact that it had on me, and transpond that to the people that work for me and others around. And it's just so important to have that stability. And it's not about, I don't think it's about being unemotional or it's about controlling your emotion. You're able to show vulnerability and still be a stable leader because it means you're human, which we all are, obviously. So for me, it was very much around being secure and being settled, is very much around knowing who you are, being aware of who you are and how you're behaving, and the impact of that on other people, because it is quite profound.
There's a couple things that all of that makes me think of. One of them is just kind of a basic statement, and you can confirm or amend this as you see fit. But this idea that when I am an inwardly sound leader, the team that I'm leading feels the significance of that stability. Is that a fair way to say that?
That is absolutely. I experience it, and I hope my team experience it as well with me. But I certainly experience it with my leaders, very much so.
You mentioned Ross, and certainly you and I have the benefit of knowing Ross, but the people listening don't. So let's talk about Ross Harper for just a second in terms of how do you see Ross as a leader worth following, as a leader who you would say, hey, Ross is embodying some of these things, and here's what it provided for me.
I'll expand on it, but one of the simplest ways I could answer that was he loved his people. And I don't say that as, hugs and kisses and all that kind of stuff. He was genuinely interested in our future, our success, and his purpose in life was, and he shared that with us, was around getting the best of others, people excelling, giving them the environment to excel. And he certainly did that with myself and the rest of the team. And we were a pretty high-performing team because of the fact that he gave us that space, that confidence, that trust, that love. He was genuinely interested in who we are and what we could become. And he provided that environment for us to grow. That led to a lot of things for me personally, from a career point of view and a personal development point of view. But that was one thing for him that was really resonated quite strongly for him, that he was genuinely interested in others. So his others focus radar was true north, and you couldn't get any better than that. He was a tough guy, but you knew that it was very much around bettering yourself and achieving the best you can.
So let's talk about the tough guy part, because this is really important. There's so many times when people get a chance to hear the idea of being inwardly sound and others focused, and there's an immediate question, okay, if I'm really those things, especially the others focused part, which you were just talking about, does that mean that substandard performance is okay, and when I don't hit my numbers, I'm just going to get a hug and no problem? I know that that's not true of Ross, but you specifically followed Ross in seasons where results had to be produced. So talk a little bit about this idea of somebody who can combine these things at the same time while also saying, hey, we need to do a good job. We need to produce results.
You know, we're ambitious people in the management team. And Ross, the carrot and stick type thing. Ross wasn't a stick kind of guy, but very much a carrot, and gave us a space to say, well, there's the outcome, guys. What do we have to do to get there? We owned the journey to get to that point, and we came together, and he was very much around the team working together and supporting each other. There's the end goal. I'm paying you to do what you do. I'll help you along the way. And he was very much around creating that environment of, if you haven't performed, you'd know about it, but it wasn't a hit across the head. It was, okay, what are we going to do going forward? Here's how we can do it all. And he would explore those kind of opportunities with you. So you took ownership and you wanted to succeed. You had this inbuilt, I'll follow Ross to the ends of the earth as a leader kind of guy, because we trusted Ross. And one of the first things I remember you talking to us about, Tim, was trust is the breakfast of champions. And I trusted Ross implicitly. And that was something that gave us the desire, the passion, the will, whatever you'd like to call it, to succeed with him and for him as well. And we took a lot of satisfaction in the results as a collective. And he recognized all of that and rewarded us. So it was very much a trust, support, others focus kind of environment that meant, yeah, let's go, guys.
Now, you and Ross and the team that Ross led, you all worked in a publicly traded ASX top 100 company in Australia that had global interests, Southeast Asia, North America as well. And so as I think about that, I also know that over time, there's been some interesting bumps along the way. There have been challenges that come from a variety of different places. So let's talk a little bit about the road that you have walked as a leader through turmoil, through challenge, through change. How is it the work that you put in on developing who you are as a person, both inwardly sound and others focused? How has that impacted your ability to lead through challenging times with some level of turmoil and a significant level of change?
It's made quite a material difference, actually. The inwardly sound part of it, I mentioned earlier on that I wouldn't have considered myself, overly inwardly sound prior to going through this. So I think being inwardly sound and strengthening that to the point that I have meant that when things came my way, I could provide that stability and leadership to my team to say, here's how we're going. Yes, this is the situation we are in. We've been thrown this, COVID, and all these other things that got thrown at us. What is the pathway forward? Being in an inwardly sound and others focused mindset means that you're able to be stable enough to assess the situation. Look at your people, be with your people, and work with them to say, what are we going to do about it? And be genuinely interested in what they're going through, because what I'm going through, I'm sure they are going through, and possibly even more. And understanding what is important and not important to them is material and actually trying to get an end result. So when I say that, it's very much around that others focus piece. understanding what they're going through, the emotional situation that they're in, the financial situation, whatever condition that they're going through or the situation they're going through, means that we can work through a solution here because they trust me that I've got their back and I know that I can rely on them to have my back as well. Whilst, yes, I'm the leader, it's very much an interactive and team environment that we work together on.
I'm going to think back on a specific moment, and if this doesn't jump into your recollection, don't worry about it. But I recall there was a time when I was in Australia with you and the group, and you were having some major challenges with the kiln. And for those that are listening that are not familiar with the cement manufacturing process, if you're having problems with your kiln, you're having a big problem. That is essentially the money-making machine. And so I remember being in the room with the group, and we were talking about our next steps in developing who we are. And there was a discussion around the room that day about the investment of time and energy that goes into this work, even while we have very acute challenges. At that moment, it was, hey, we've got a kiln down, and yet we're all in the room here today talking about how inwardly sound and others focused we are. And I was just really struck in that moment about the commitment in the room. And I remember the comment of, we are handling this differently than we would have if we were not working on being inwardly sound and others focused. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because sometimes these ideas feel very ethereal. They're up in the air. They feel far off. But that was a very tangible moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I do remember it. And it was quite pivotal. And I thought it was the right decision. I know it was the right decision. And the team did. Everyone said and agreed that to actually enable us to better deal with situations like this, we have to continue with this work. This actually is an enabler to being able to deal with these situations. And we'd already seen the benefits and the changes in the way that we worked as a team and as individuals, having gone through the work so far. So we knew it was something that made a difference, and stopping it would actually be more detrimental to the business than continuing it, despite all those other things. And people were invested. We were invested in the program, in the work, and saw the benefits of it. So it wasn't a difficult decision, certainly from my part, and I know some of the others, having spoken with them about it, that this was the right thing to do.
So if somebody were to say to you, okay, you have a major challenge going on. In this case, it was the kiln being down. Don't you need to kind of shut down that longer term development of who you are, and you can come back to this work when it's easier and there's more time and space 6 months from now or a year from now, whenever? What would you say to the person who would say, hey, just hit pause and deal with the urgent?
I'd bring it back to something like the manage energy, not time. So I can work 12 hours a day and not have a break, but I know that in the afternoon my productivity will drop off significantly. Or I can have a break in the middle of the day, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever the case may be, and I know that my productivity after that would be far, far superior. This was one of those situations, if I could use that analogy, this was very much that. The time to pause, to stop, to reflect, to continue the work actually enabled us to better deal with the next day, the next afternoon, the next week. And so it was important for us to sort of maintain that, because it was the enabler. And similar to the manage energy, not time, by doing the work, it gave us that energy, because the time, if it's not used effectively, you could be spending 10 hours to do what you could do in 4 hours. So in other words, you're going backwards. So stopping and taking and continuing the work was actually the right decision. And it meant that we were better able to handle situations that came to us beyond that point.
There are so many things that are vying for our time and attention. And it's very tempting and very reasonable at a certain level that all of our energy and all of our focus and all of our time gets consumed by the urgent. But there are these things that are important, but not urgent. And how do we create space and time for them? And I think in many ways, that's what you're talking about there. So using that as a bridge, I want to come over to your own personal journey. You alluded to it earlier, where you've said, and thank you for your transparency and your honesty, I wouldn't necessarily have labeled myself as a particularly inwardly sound person before you were willing to do this work. You put in significant energy and significant time over a long period of time to work on who you are. And so, I just want people who are listening who might say, hey, that's not possible. To me, you're a living example that it is. Talk a little bit about what it was like for you to continue to invest in the important but not urgent around developing who you were as an inwardly sound and others focused leader. And how did you continue to prioritize that even as the business had other priorities for you as well?
The work we did around the inwardly sound piece actually gave me an awareness of some of the blind spots, and it helped me to explore some of those things. So around the emotional wheel, I remember the exercise we did around the emotional wheel, and mapping that out over the course of the week, it just demonstrated very clearly how much, this is the power of some data, how much fluctuation there was in that. Recognizing that meant that, okay, well, here is something that I just need to keep a check on. Doesn't mean that I don't have to be emotional and go through all of those things, but recognizing the state that I'm in meant that I can adapt my behavior. So that was a part of it. Managing energy, not time. Again, I go back into that, and when I think about what time of the day is my most productive, and so it'd be the mornings and sort of later in the afternoons. So all of the heavy lifting was done during those times. Recognizing that, being self-aware, meant that I could tailor my days, and it doesn't always work out that way, but understanding and being self-aware in all of those things means that you can actually deal with, in my case, I could actually deal with those situations a lot better than what I had in the past. And I actually recognize who I was, what I was, the shadow of the leader that we spoke of earlier on, and how important and impactful that was. So being inwardly sound not only was important for me, but it was also important for the people that I lead and the colleagues that I work with.
Gosh, I can get emotional about that last sentence you just said. Do we understand that developing who we are at the core of who we are, do we understand about how that affects the people that we're leading? I think it's so easy to lose track of that. And I mean that not only in the business sense, I mean that at home too. Do I understand that how developed or underdeveloped I am is impacting my wife, is impacting my kids? So I just love the concept of that, because I think it's so real and it's so important. Let's talk for a second. This is hard work, and you and a group of your colleagues would be able to talk about very clearly that it is challenging work. And sometimes people come into this and they say, you know what? That's just not possible after the age of 30. I am who I am. I can't develop who I am. It's fully baked, and everybody else can deal with me as I am. Being somebody who has put in the energy on that, what would you say to somebody who says, that's a waste of time, that's a waste of energy, I can't really grow and develop at the core of who I am if I'm much past the age of 30? What would be your response to that?
You learn till the day you die, is my view. And I think you have to be open to it, Tim. If you're open to it, it will happen. I was I think it was 45, 46 years old when we started the work, maybe 47. And being 53 now, certainly at I wouldn't say the back end, but past the middle of that development, the change occurred because I believed in the work. The work was fantastic, and it was very much around understanding self. It was providing the guidance, the tools, the mentorship, the support, all of those kind of things that meant, yeah, give me some more. I want to understand some more. And the more we got into it, the deeper it got. It was sort of these layers that we were peeling. And the more layers we started to peel, the more we saw inside, and we thought, oh, wow. It was like one of my project managers years ago said to me, he says, the more I know, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And at a point in time in your life, you have a certain awareness and knowledge of who you are and what you are. But then as you start exploring more, you start to find those gaps that you weren't aware were evident in the past. And this was very much around finding those gaps. So when I got to the point, there's some gaps here that I'm now able to find and do something about, that kept the engagement going and kept the will and the desire to do all this. And I would see the differences in myself and understanding more and the impact of that on, as you say, my family, because it's not something you switch on and switch off when you come to work. This is about who you are. It's about authentically and genuinely and intrinsically who you are. And your personality, and this is my own personal view, your personality is your personality. How you behave is something you can control. I don't like public speaking. I've never liked public speaking. But in my role, it's something that I have to do on a daily basis.
And we'll just have to pretend that nobody's actually listening right now, if that's the case. So we'll just pretend. Yeah.
It's me and Tim. Tim and I just having
just
a conversation.
You and me talking. That's right.
Isn't that what it is?
Yes. For your purposes, yes, it is.
So I think that you're never too old to learn, but you need to want to. And without wanting to, I'm not sure that this is necessarily going to give you the best result. You need to be authentic about it. We've only had 5 years. I say that only. And I'm sure that there's so much more that we could go into here. But what that 5 years gave me and my colleagues was quite profound. And my family even see that I've had a career development, and there's a lot of things that have come. I've recently been promoted to another position as well. So there's a recognition from a business point of view and from a family point of view of the differences in who I am.
I love that you're experiencing the outcomes and the benefits of having done the work. It's hard work. And the fact that you would be able to say, yeah, there's promotion things that have come my way now that are influenced by me being willing to do this work. And there are impacts at home. And this is one of the things that is a kind of outcropping of this work that we didn't set out to do in the first place. But time and time again, we get the feedback that the other places where I influence, the other places where I lead, which includes my family, are impacted as well. So I love that the benefit of your willingness to do the hard work is showing up not only at work, but also at home. And I think that's really meaningful. As we wrap up here, and you think about folks that are listening that are saying, okay, 3/4 of your effectiveness as a leader comes from who you are, not what you do. Okay, I think I can buy into that. I look at my past, but I just don't know about diving in to really work on who I am. That sounds dangerous. That sounds scary. Are we sure there's going to be a payoff? How would you advise somebody who is considering whether or not they want to work on that kind of core of who they are, perhaps not as spring chickens, but a little bit or later on in their careers? What would you say to them as somebody who has really gone into that work wholeheartedly yourself?
I'd say be open to recognizing that you may not necessarily know everything about yourself that you should. And this work is there to provide you with an avenue that helps understand who you are and what you don't know about yourself, because there's a lot about what we don't know about ourselves. There's a lot that I didn't. And I was someone who had been working for the last 25 years as a professional and developed a whole lot of traits. But then going through something like this was, for me, something that created a whole lot of awareness around a number of things that improved my effectiveness as a leader and who I am. And it's something that's continuing. So I'm not at the end point, far from it, but the realization, the self-awareness, the understanding of what I want to be. The bit about the purpose was really profound for me. It reinforced and not only reinforced, but it also gave me some additional clarity around my purpose as a human being. And it then, from the prioritization work that you mentioned earlier on, it allowed me to say, okay, if I'm going to be happy in life and satisfied in life, if what I do aligns with my purpose, everything is good, because I know that I will get satisfaction because I'm meeting my purpose in life. And that was a really important thing. And those gaps there, I say to the people listening, the gaps that you may not be aware, and I could say with confidence, I'm sure that you have gaps that you're not aware of. This work will absolutely help you find those. And you can choose what you want to do about them, but at least you're aware of them.
There's two things that I have to say as we finish out, which is to say, number one, thank you for being willing to share your story and share an example of somebody who has been willing to do that hard look in the mirror and then do the work based on what they saw. But related to that is really that latter part of what I just said is thank you for being willing to do the work. That's the thing that is such a challenge for so many people. And you and I have a story to talk about today because you were willing to. And so you get a chance to experience the positive repercussions of that effort, both at work and at home. I never could have imagined when you started down this road 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that we would be here today talking specifically about the path that you have traveled, the journey that you have traveled. But what a fun thing to be able to look on, and what a fun thing to be able to look forward. Because you mentioned this, you're 53. Your story is not done. You've got a lot of leading left to do. And the fact that you've been willing to look at how inwardly sound and others focused you are, or at times are not, and you look forward and say, how can I make that better? How can I improve that? So thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your thoughts.
My absolute pleasure, Tim. Look, what you did changed a lot of things for me, and for that I'm very grateful. It's a big investment, and I say investment because there's positive that comes out of it, a lot of strong things. And if someone asked me, having gone through it, would I go through it again? In a heartbeat, absolutely in a heartbeat.
There are a number of great outcomes from that conversation with Domenic Saffioti that we could key in on. One certainly centers on this idea of stability. When leaders are more inwardly sound, they provide stability for their teams even when the world around them is unstable. What's the value of that? Well, in one way, it's incalculable. But from a more tangible standpoint, just think about an environment you've been in that was not stable, that had a lot of turmoil, either from within or from the outside. For example, if you're on a team where relationships are frayed and unhealthy conflict is the norm, it's impossible to do your very best work. You're burdened in terms of time and energy just to try to survive in an unstable environment like that. You're supposed to try to hit your numbers and beat your external competitors, but you don't have a solid footing from which to operate. It's kind of like trying to leap as high as you can while standing on top of a great big rubber ball. Can you get a little elevation off of that ball? Yes, but not nearly so much as when you have a solid foundation from which to jump. Providing a solid, stable environment is an essential responsibility of leadership, and leaders can't provide that if they're not profoundly stable within themselves. Another of Dom's great comments came when he talked about how important it is to want to do this work, to actually want to become more inwardly sound and others focused. In that regard, we're talking about the very opposite of checking a development box that human resources has asked you to check. This want to is very important because urgent demands are going to pop up. They will show up as temptations to stop this effort. The urgent will invite you to set aside what is important. And on top of that, working on ourselves is hard and it takes time. You heard Linda Coates say that in our previous episode. So you've got urgent matters, the time it takes to do this work, and the difficulty of the work. Those will all invite you to delay and maybe not even begin the work at all. But you heard in Dom what happens when you resist those temptations. He noted valuable outcomes both at work and at home. At work, he's received promotions and moved up the chain of command. At home, he's been a more secure and purposeful leader, someone who's created a more stable environment in which his family can attempt to thrive. Yes, the work to becoming more inwardly sound and others focused is challenging, and there will be temptations to not engage in it. But if you really want to, if you're willing to work on the very core of who you are in order to be and stay the very best leader you can be, it is available to you no matter your age or stage in life. If you show up with the openness, commitment, and engagement that Domenic Saffioti did, growing and developing as a leader in profound and significant ways is not just possible, it is inevitable. But you have to really want it. We originally planned that this would be the final episode of this, our summer series, entitled Who Not What, From Research to Application. But we couldn't help ourselves. So our next episode will be a bonus episode in the series. In it, we will get to visit with someone who has had a backstage pass to watch both organizations and leaders who are actively applying the Who Not What principle in their leadership development. It will be a unique perspective from a very special person. You won't want to miss that conversation. Until then, this is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following. And be sure to follow us wherever you engage with podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your colleagues and friends. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.